The Podium Pod is brought to you by The Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We're also brought to you by FBL, Fantasy Ballers League, an Australian baller lifestyle brand that aims to provide you with classics on and off the court. FBL makes a bold statement in its distinctive white, black and gold colours, with products ranging from basketball shoes to apparel, accessories and more. Be bold with gold. Check out the FBL collection at fblsport.com today. And don't miss the 2023 FIBA World Cup, with all 82 games brought to you live and exclusively across ESPN, ESPN2 and the ESPN app. Plus, all Boomers games, Team USA games and finals will be available on ESPN via KO freebies at no charge. Hello and welcome to the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup across Japan, Indonesia and the Philippines, brought to you by The Pick and Roll. Adam Webster again with you, and I'm joined by The Pick and Roll's Ben Malice. Ben, that's more like it. Australia won by 20 points over Japan, 109-89, and now we'll move through to the second round of the FIBA World Cup.
Yeah, Adam, it was much better, wasn't it? Although, again, I think we must acknowledge we're playing a Japanese side that we should be beating, and we'll delve into that. But the guys did the job. The first half was super impressive. They got up early. In the second half, I wasn't ever too worried, but they definitely took their foot off the gas. But they're through to face probably Slovenia on Friday, which is going to be the tournament in a nutshell. But they did their job tonight and cruised through with a 20-point win, which is well-deserved in the end.
Definitely the best start this Australian side has had in this World Cup, with a 25-17 first quarter, and really led across the game by two players in particular, Xavier Cooks and Josh Giddey, from an offensive perspective, but also I want to call out Josh Green from a defensive perspective as well. We'll talk about Cooks first. He ended up with 24 points on 12 of 20 shooting. A lot of those were because he had 10 offensive rebounds, 16 rebounds total. He was dominant on the boards. Japan just had no answers for him. Every time Australia would put up a shot, he would be somewhere near it. And with 10 offensive rebounds, that's next level from Xavier Cooks, the former NBL MVP.
Yeah, it's an outrageous stat line, isn't it? And I was joking to someone during the game that he was looking like Joel Embiid going up against this Japanese front line. And the Japanese just had no chance of stopping him. They were too small. But you mentioned the three names off the top, and I agree with that. Cooks, Green and Giddey. Their athleticism, their size was too much, and it was always going to be too much. But with Cooks especially, his motor was on today, and you could just see him running up and down the court. There was a play that I remember John Casey highlighted with Trevor Gleeson where Cooks was just rim running, and he got rewarded with the ball. And in that sense, what he was doing tonight, it was just really simple plays that he was doing well over and over again, using his size on defense, getting out there, using his length, and then offensively just crashing the boards and getting easy points inside. So great performance from him. And a lot is going to rest on his shoulders as we look ahead to the next couple of games. But I think I saw a stat before we jumped on that that's the second most offensive rebounds in a game in World Cup history. So tonight was one for the books by Xavier Cooks, and definitely his coming out party for the Boomers.
And speaking of one for the books, Josh Giddey really took over down the stretch, in particular when Japan was sort of threatening to almost get it into single digits. He ended with 26 points, 5 boards and 11 assists, and looked far more comfortable tonight. Obviously, a side that isn't the standard of this Germany team, but I think at times you just need confidence games, and this was one where Josh Giddey can point to it and say, I was probably the best player on the floor overall across the entire game.
Yeah, and I'm definitely guilty of expecting a lot from Josh Giddey. Yeah. You've got to take a step back, and I do as well. He's 2 years into his NBA career. He's in his early 20s. And tonight versus Germany is a good illustration of where he's at, that when he has a clear size advantage and he's going up against players that aren't on his level, he's already at a point now where he can dominate and control games, and you're spot on. Another awesome box score line if you're looking at that, but the way he controlled the game, the way that he looked to score early as well was something that jumped out. He was trying to get into the paint, get his floaters going, get his little jumpers going, and at least giving himself a chance to get on the scoreboard. And we looked up a few minutes into the game and he had 5 assists as well. So a very impressive game from Josh Giddey. And for his part, he was just professional, that from the tip through to the end, he was the cog in the offensive machine, and he was the reason the Boomers were able to get a lot of 3-pointers especially and really boost that lead.
And finally, Josh Green, 15 points, so he had an offensive role, but more impressive was his ability to shut down the ball handler for Japan, and that will come into handy when he goes up against his teammate Luka Doncic in the next round. We'll talk about that game in more depth in a moment, but it was exciting to see Josh out there for 21 minutes. Hopefully that's a precursor to him playing far more minutes in the next game. But really impressive on both ends. A corner 3 threat, which the team obviously needs because they struggle to hit 3-pointers, 8 of 27 in this game. So having Josh Green's skill set out there is so underrated for this team.
Yeah, I'd take it a step further. It's just needed to beat the next team they're going to have to beat, and prognosticating forward, if they have any chance of beating your Canadas, your Team USAs of the world, they need Josh Green on both ends, because as much as we just said Giddey fueled this game and he is the most important player in terms of orchestrating the offense, Green is that prototypical 3-and-D player. He shoots the ball. We saw him get open looks from the corner and nail them pretty well today. I remember he did miss a wide open one. He almost had too much space there. So he does that on offense, and defensively, he hit the nail on the head. He is our best one-on-one perimeter defender. He is going to get a very familiar face in the next round, but it's good that he was playing 20-plus minutes tonight, because that number is going to have to accelerate up to 30 minutes now, and he gets 3 days off before the next game. So the 3 young guys we've spoken about have really marked this game as their coming out party for the Boomers, but now is the time to see whether they can elevate that and sustain that form against a much better side coming up.
I want to talk about the upcoming game against Slovenia, because it's highly likely to be Slovenia at the moment. They're sitting atop of Group F. They've obviously won both of their games to this stage. The other team to advance from that group is going to likely be Georgia, because Slovenia will probably beat Cape Verde. Georgia will probably beat Venezuela based on current form. So you're looking at games against Slovenia and Georgia. Georgia are a different kettle of fish. We can talk about that later in the piece. But for Slovenia, obviously, they're led by the arguably the best player in the tournament, Luka Doncic. I want to get your ideal sort of 5 players on the floor for Australia to play the most minutes in that game together, because we've seen, this team kind of exposed by guards who can get to the rim and who can get their shot off against Germany. And, Slovenia have, I don't want to call him a guard because he's 6'7", 6'8", but he's one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world, and he can get anything he wants anywhere on the court. So what's your ideal 5 for being able to contain that and limit that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think it's the question Gorgon is going to have to be asking his coaching staff over the next couple of days. And to flip that question a little bit, I think we need to identify the players that, with all due respect, Luka Doncic would be licking his fingers and thinking about facing. And Patty Mills and Joe Ingles are 2 that spring to mind, because we've relied on that offense for so long, but they're middle 30s age players, and Luka eats players like that for breakfast in the NBA. So I think we can really only realistically get away with having one of those 2 out on the court. And even the same with Jawop Ruth and Nick Kay, that again, they're not of the caliber of big men that can defend Luka in space. So the lineup question that you posed, it's almost revealing itself that Xavier Cooks, he's the best option to play that 5 position in my eyes. And then we just need to surround him with as much length and size as we can. And that reveals itself to be Thibault, Josh Green, and Josh Giddey. So the combination of those 3 and Xavier Cooks, they are the 4 guys that I think we need to have out in the court if we look to a hypothetical close game against Luka. And then in that 5th spot, we can get away with a Patty Mills or a Joe Ingles or whoever you want to make the lineups fit. But I think Gorgon needs to just really prioritize size, length, and just on-ball intellect, because we need to get up in his space. We beat him 2 years ago, but I think we also need to acknowledge that Patty Mills had an out-of-body experience 2 years ago, and that really fueled that. And we're not going to see him score 42 points. Well, I hope he does, but I don't think that's going to happen again on Friday. So we're going to need a really strong defensive unit to just slow him down, because nobody stops Luka, but we need to slow him down. And we've lost the ability to throw Bogut and Baines and Landau out there and use that size. We don't have that physicality aspect. So we need to get long and we need to get athletic in my eyes.
And Dante Exum is the other one that needs to play
Yeah.
big minutes as well. I mean, we've seen
Good
his
call.
defensive ability, and I just think you have to play the players that you can rely upon to try and contain Luca. I understand that Nick Kay is a favourite of Brian Goorjian, and he's played big minutes across these group games, but he just got torched against Germany. There's no other way to put it, and he's a very capable player, but he's coming up against one of the best players in the world, and you have to game plan for that. And I think this team isn't going to win by scoring 109 points against Slovenia. They're going to win by limiting Slovenia to a low total.
Yeah, and it's time for those cliches to come out, like game 7 mentality, must win, call it what you will. We can't allow a 10-zip run to start the game. We can't have Reith and Kay out there with Paddy Mills, 3 players that Luca's going to see with targets on their chest, and fall in an 8-hole hole, because that could be the difference, like it was against Germany 2 nights ago. So I think Goorjian needs to put egos to the side and put his lineups to the side and just really come out with his best units on Friday if it does become Slovenia, because even if these guys rack up 35 minutes, it doesn't matter. We need to win this game. Otherwise, the tournament's over. And I think Goorjian needs to use that mindset from the start.
And you're right in that we can afford to have one guy that it can be a little bit exposed out there, because the other 4, the sum of that should overcome the 5th more sort of defensively deficient player. So you can afford to have one of Paddy, one of Joe out there at any one time, just to be able to provide that veteran presence, that scoring. And, Paddy continues to be one of the highest field goal takers on the team, and I can't see that changing against Slovenia. They won't forget previous games against Paddy Mills either, so I imagine they'll be throwing everything at him to try and limit him.
He does, but I think with Paddy, he's had a circumspect tournament. I think we have to be frank. He had that 1 quarter explosion earlier, but tonight he wasn't at his best, and Germany the same, again, apart from that first quarter. So not to write him off, he should start. He should get the opportunity to perform against Slovenia, but we can't afford for him to be going 4 of 13. And even tonight, he was making some sloppy reads on offense and wasn't just making the easy pass. And I think offensively, you talk about defense, offensively, we need to have the ball zipping around. And that was something that Giddy did very well in the first half, that he wasn't dribbling the air out of the ball, which he was prone to 2 nights ago. The ball was moving, it was popping. I think 8 of our first 10 field goals had assists. And that's what we have to really emphasize on offense, because I agree, we can't be relying on scoring 110 points, but if we're going to go defense-heavy lineups, then we need to really be efficient on offense and do the little things right, which is passing the ball, moving. Again, back cuts was another thing that got us a few baskets tonight. So the more we talk this out, I think the next game against Slovenia, it just needs to be a high basketball IQ game, because that's what you need to beat someone like Luka Doncic, when you're right, he's probably going to be out for blood, isn't he? And wants to revenge what happened a couple of years ago.
And the fact of the matter is, looking forward to that group phase, second round and classification stage, we have to win both games, and we have to then hope that, results go our way in terms of, Slovenia beating Germany, we beat Slovenia, everyone has 1 loss, and then the tiebreaker is the plus minus differential, of which Australia should be pretty strong if we win 2 games and one of the other sides loses 1. Obviously, with Germany only just getting past us, you would hope that Slovenia smack them in the mouth and then we get a couple of really good wins. But you never want to have to rely on points differential to get through to the quarters, but that's where we are. We lost a game, and unfortunately, you just can't afford to lose any games in the World Cup and not need results to go your way. So we'll be watching the other games with a lot of interest, a lot more interest than we'd like to.
Yeah, in a funny sense, the schedule's gonna break out well for the Boomers if Slovenia win the next game, because that will be the second group phase. And again, that's win or go home. Either we win and keep going, or if we lose that, we're done anyway. But it means we'll be facing Georgia in the second of those games. And again, if we want to be advancing, we need to be beating Georgia. But at least we'll know at that point what margin we need. We'll be able to, again, if we need to push, we can push. If we can put the gas pedal off a little bit later, we'll know. We've just got to get over, as you keep saying, and I keep saying, who the player that is probably the best player in the world at the moment. And again, that's what it comes down to. We're going to have to beat him eventually. It's just a bit of a shame that it's going to happen in the group phase and not in a knockout game and in a medal round.
We're recording this right after the game, so there's still some game day 3 matches that are ongoing and upcoming. So looking forward to that second round and classification in Group A. I'm just going to whip through the groups here. It looks like the Dominican Republic are going to finish top. They were 3-0. And then it should be Italy getting over the top of the Philippines. They're currently up in that game, so they'll probably advance. No real surprises there. Then in Group D, you've got a battle between Lithuania and Montenegro. One of those two teams will finish top, one will finish second. That will be said by that final game. Of course, Group E, Germany and Australia are the clear two that go through there. And then in Group H, Canada and Latvia will go through it. Just a question of what order in which they'll go through, which is the shocker of the tournament. And I sent you guys a text during the France-Lebanon game that France looked like they had their talent stolen by the Monstars. They started terribly and only just got over Lebanon, who were smacked by about 55 points from Canada a couple of days ago. What has happened to this French side? Are they just thinking, we've got the Olympics, so we're going to get through anyway, so we'll just kind of cruise? Like, it's just inexplicable how bad they've played in this tournament.
It is. The Perth kid inside of me saying maybe they have the reservation for Bali booked just down the road and they're ready to get to Canggu and relax, because they look, even this afternoon when they beat Lebanon, they were checked out in that game. I was talking to someone about this morning. The Latvia game for France, that is a typical FIBA game, right? That it was close. It was two European games that came down to a couple of plays and Latvia pulled that out. For mine, that's not a catastrophic result for France, but to see them get spoke by Canada, there's audio going around of us doing this podcast last week and me predicting France make the final. So we just have to scratch that from the records, because
I don't think we can delete that one.
It never happened, because Canada just came out and smoked them. And again, it speaks a lot about Canada, but you're right for France, the team that's finished second at the last two major tournaments. It just didn't look good. I know that's a very cliche thing to say, but they've just not had the focus that they need at this tournament. And yeah, to see them struggling to beat Lebanon this afternoon, it's a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it?
Well, one thing that is looking good is our predictions that the USA should win this tournament, and they've looked obviously pretty unstoppable. They've got a points differential of 55 through two games. They will play Jordan in their final group match. So the USA look like a side that's extremely well put together, as we expected. They're not as strong as previous USA teams in Olympics past and in some World Cups past. Not that the USA have been dominant in World Cups. I think they've lost 5 of the last 8. But they just look the goods, and it just kind of looks like it's going to be USA versus Canada, with Spain maybe interjecting themselves a little bit. I looking forward too far, I know, but those are the two standout teams in this tournament. They look like the most dominant teams in this tournament.
Yeah, correct. I'd even say Canada's been the most impressive team by a long way so far. And the way that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as we kept talking about Luka on this podcast, but Shai's right up there for being the MVP and the best player in this tournament. And again, the thought of a Canada-USA final, kind of like us playing New Zealand, right, in any big game, that would be a tantalising prospect. And to think that Canada can get there, it's not just a wild prognostication anymore. They are looking like an elite squad, and I'm sure they think they can get there. So I tend to agree that Spain looks like they can get through and maybe pull, I might probably not even pull an upset, but give one of those two teams a game. And I think whoever gets through Slovenia and Australia probably can give one of those two teams a decent game. But for mine, I tend to agree with you, Adam, that it's looking like Canada and the US are on a collision course for the final.
Well, it looks like Australia will be playing on Friday night, our time. It will either be the early or late game in Okinawa, and we will, of course, come to you after that one to discuss the post-mortem of how Australia fared in their game that is likely to be against Luka Doncic and Slovenia, followed by another one on Sunday. You can, of course, catch all these games live and exclusive on ESPN and their partner networks. Ben, thanks for joining me this evening. Good to see the Australians through to the second round.
Yes, Adam, they got the job done, and let's go face Luka.
That was the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup, brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Thanks so much for listening, and see you again next time.